everybody? It's your boy Gsluke here for our DFS fades and sleepers for this week's AT&T Byron Nelson. They got ownership out a little bit earlier than usual, so able to hop into our favorite gems, diamonds in the rough, our sleeper picks, and of course those fades, the high-owned plays that I don't think end up coming through for you this week in DFS. This is arguably the most important video every single week because not only are we considering a player's projection, but more importantly, especially for some of these large field contests, their ownership in the game theory side of things. So with a lot to talk about, a lot I want to get into here, let's go ahead and get right on into it. All right, we'll start with our fades as per usual, and it's a scary name up top that I'm fading. The most expensive player on the slate, Scottie Scheffele, at $10,900 is going to be a fade, and it is certainly a very hard one to stomach. I mean, he's been in an incredible run of late, but it comes down to first off motivation this week and second off skill set. Let's talk about the motivation factor. Of course, we have the PGA Championship just next week. He's a local guy. He has a lot of local ties to the area. So if he wasn't playing in this event, he would likely be in this area anyways or up there at Southern Hills. And what better to, try and stay in tournament shape before you go into arguably the biggest tournament for him of the year. I mean, if he could go back-to-back at the majors, that would be massive. I mean, he's already number one in the world. This is legacy building time for him. So I already think he has his eye on next week. In terms of the skill set here, he's more of a well-rounded player, right? Gains across all four stat categories. We saw it at the Masters. Anytime he got out of position, he was unbelievable at getting up and down. And that's really the hallmark of his game, is he doesn't have a weakness. At these birdie fests, we're looking for players that are explosive, that can go out there, shoot 8 or 9 under rounds. The specialty for Scottie Scheffele is keeping his card clean, going out there and not making many bogeys. You saw that at the Masters. He was not among the birdie-making leaders at the end of the week. In fact, there were a couple others that caught up to him, specifically Rory McIlroy with his Sunday charge actually exceeded Scottie Scheffele's birdies, but he had a much cleaner card for the week. And at the Byron Nelson, that's not going to be a huge help. It's an extremely easy golf course where you're looking at making maybe 6 to 7 birdies per round. It's much more about the explosiveness than it is actually keeping the card together. Reason why it's an extremely scary fade here is, of course, the recent form. Last year at this event, only finished in 47th, so it was actually not a very impressive week for him, but the win at the Masters, 2 or 3 wins down there in Florida, just 5 wins in a relatively short stretch, it speaks for itself. I mean, the shots gained are just as impressive as you would expect, gaining a ton in every category. Just the one issue I have here, right, is first off the ownership, he's up here at 24.7%. Motivation second off, and third off, I'm not sure if he has the aggressive nature we're looking for. When he first came out on tour, I would have certainly pinned him as that type of player. He was extremely aggressive, but he's matured. He's turned and morphed into a completely different player, a better player, clearly. He's the number one player in the world at this point, and that's because he's kind of reined in that aggressiveness. So I think if you're looking at a long-term perspective, Scottie Scheffele would be among the leaders in birdie or better percentage. That just isn't his game anymore. Like I said, he's morphed into a completely different player. I prefer guys like Justin Thomas that are still extremely aggressive. Dustin Johnson fits that same type of build. And I prefer guys like a Scottie Scheffele, also Xander Schauffele and Brooks Koepka, who we're going to talk about here in a second as fades next week for the major championship rather than this week at a birdie fest. So let's hop into the next fade, which is Xander Schauffele at $9,700. Another major killer. Anytime you get him at these big time events, anytime you have an extremely strong field, he really shines. For whatever reason, it's kind of like a Patrick Reed back in the day, makes his hay at the biggest of events. And that's certainly good for world ranking points, for your wallet as well, with some of the biggest purses in golf. But it's more importantly about the skill set. He's well-rounded, just like a Scottie Scheffele. Great at getting up and down, going to gain across all 4 stat categories. In fact, if we take a look at his last 24 measured rounds, which is a pretty rough stretch for him, especially considering that the Zurich Classic stats, of course, don't count in the shots gain metrics. He's still gaining across all 4 categories, right? So he's very similar to a Scottie Scheffele in the fact that the reason why he shines at these harder events is when you put him in a bad position, he's still gaining to the field. He's going to find a way more often than not to outperform his competitors in that area, and that pays dividends when conditions are tough. Unfortunately, at these birdie fests, like I said, we're looking for firepower, guys that are going to make a ton of birdies. And one thing that's kind of left his game this year is his birdie or better percentage. He's been much better about keeping his card clean, getting up and down. That's why he's been so well-rounded over this stretch, but he also hasn't had those ceiling performances, right? You'd expect somebody who's gaining across all four categories to be in a torrent run like somebody like a Scottie Scheffler or a Justin Thomas. But other than the team event, which again isn't even counted in these metrics, he hasn't really done anything. So that just shows you the, I would say, high floor aspect that he has, but also relatively low ceiling aspect. And these are for GPP contests, right? We're looking for a top 5 potential even winning performance from guys here at the top of the $9,000 range. And I personally just don't see it with Xander, right? He got the win, but it was in a team event. I think there's a huge asterisk on that. Of course, completely different format, also completely different nerves playing alongside another player. I don't want to completely hold it against him, right? I had him in my player pool. I was glad he did that. I had a very solid week because Xander and Cantlay went out there and won, but I'm not sure how much credit we can really give him there. Now, lastly, we have Brooks Koepka down here at $9,200. It's also worth noting that I have Xander at 17.6% ownership. So, of course, one of the higher owned plays here in the top of the 9K range. And even though Brooks is relatively low owned, I think we need to avoid him this week. He's obviously focused on the PGA Championship next week. He's been quoted many a times as saying that's all he really cares about. And a lot of times when he shows up before a major, he doesn't have his best stuff. In fact, the last 3 times out, he's missed 2 of those 3 cuts. Hasn't had a very solid performance. And really the only one of note was last year before the PGA Championship, and that was when he was on a run. He was on an unbelievable stretch of golf right there. He was for about 2 to 3 months. He was by far the best player on the world, almost won the PGA Championship, won the Waste Management right around that type of year, but this isn't that same type of golfer. If we take a look at the shots gained metrics, even over the last 24 measured rounds where he's been a lot better than late, he's been middling at best off the tee on approach. He's usually a lot better than that. And around the green with the putter, he's been right around a neutral, which for somebody in the 9K range really isn't doing it for me. You know, it'd be solid for somebody in the high 7Ks or even the low 8K range. But you're talking about a stud option that you're hoping finishes in the top 5 or top 10 at the very least. If you take a look at the last 50 measured rounds, it gets a lot more ugly. The off the tee and approach stats get even closer to a neutral, and he's still right around a neutral with the around the green and the putting. So the fact of the matter is, when we've seen Brooks playing in these regular tour events, he hasn't looked like major championship Brooks. Now, next week, I'm super excited about him. In fact, I hope he misses the cut this week so that he's first off lower owned next week and also a little bit cheaper. I just think all of that would play into him being a solid play at Southern Hills. But this week where we're looking for perhaps a 20 to 25 under par winner, I don't think his game's willing to get there. I mean, he first off deals with issues with the putter, isn't somebody who's going to make 25 to 30 birdies on a week. And the approach play and the off the tee play, I mean, we've seen the issues over the last 24, even last 50 measured rounds. Hasn't been nearly as sharp as we'd hope to see from somebody like a Brooks Koepka, who's at least known as one of the best ball strikers in the world. Just hasn't looked like that of late. So $9,200, just 9.7% ownership. Still going to be somebody that I'm well under the field on. And now we're going to go to our sleeper picks. So the guys that I do believe in that maybe a little bit lower owned than they should be. And let's start off with Dustin Johnson. And there is an interesting narrative around DJ that he's a little bit aloof, doesn't really care. Why would he show up before a major championship other than to just hit some shots and get ready for the major? Well, if you take a look at his track record before majors, you can see that that's when he's had some of his best performances. First off, at the Palmetto Championship, before last year's, I believe, PGA Championship, he finished 12th. The time before that, it was before the Masters in 2020. He finished tied for second at the Vivint Texas Open. And the time before that, I don't really remember what golf tournament it was. It was also there in 2020, but he finished in 10th place. So the last 3 times he's played the week before a major championship, it's been a 12th, a second place finish, and a 10th place finish. Just ridiculous stuff from, of course, world number 1 at that point when he finished in second place at Houston Open. And then next week went out there and won the Masters. So this is somebody who looks to catch form at these events before the major championship and then tries to carry that into the major. So unlike somebody like Brooks that's probably here just to, kind of hit some shots, get some practice on the tees, hopefully miss the cut and get to Southern Hills a little bit early, DJ's going out there and trying to win this event. In fact, if you look even further into DJ's past, the first missed cut, you have to look back to 2015, 2016, where you missed the cut the week before a major. So obviously he's been engaged. I mean, this is somebody, DJ, who's looks like he's purposely missed cuts before out there. Hasn't done that before week before a major for whatever reason. Seems to be engaged to me. And if you go back even further, he has 3 wins the week before a major. He also has 5 other top 5 finishes. So this is somebody who in his career, if you actually dive deep into the finishes, has been great the week before a major. Outside of that, the shots gained metrics are starting to look a lot more DJ-like. He's gaining off the tee, gaining on approach, and also gaining significantly with the putter. The one issue is around the green, and that's historically not been a huge issue for him. He's been much closer to a neutral player than a loser in that category, at least for the longer term sample size with DJ. But at this golf course specifically, you can get away with a shoddy around the green play. You're going to hit a ton of greens, a ton of fairways here at TPC Greg Ranch. So somebody, skill set's fitting, their narrative is fitting, the fact that he loves playing before these major championships. So don't be surprised if DJ goes out there and wins this by 5 shots. Next up, you have Hideki Matsuyama, who you're probably surprised to see even as a play for me. I mean, I've been fading this guy with the back injury for quite some time, and it's pretty much been a print fest. We've had at least 2 or 3 rake-free contests because of Hideki Matsuyama's back injury, but he's taken some time off. Now, I didn't play him at the Masters, and he finished T14, which didn't really matter, right? In GPPs, that was far from an optimal play. Of course, Scottie Scheffler is the guy up top that you had to have. But now I'm starting to get intrigued, right? He's taken the time off. He looked decent at the Masters, even with the back injury. And now you get him at a golf course that's seemingly perfect for his game. I mean, easy to read greens, wide open fairways. So even if the back is acting up, he's missing left to right off the tee or something like that, he should be able to be in play, not be in any type of real trouble. Lean into that approach play that even with the back issue, he was among the best in the field. And he's been a positive putter over the last 24 measured rounds. And even over the last 50 measured rounds, he's been a gainer to the field with the putter. Actually, no, he hasn't. He's a slight loser, but over his last 24 measured rounds, he's a huge gainer to the field with the putter. I mean, that's intriguing to me. I mean, he's clearly turning a corner with the putter. I mean, even when he's losing 0.21 shots per round, that's much better than his baseline. His baseline's closer to half a stroke lost per round. So I like the golf course fit for him. I'm expecting that time off to have paid some dividends. And knowing Hideki, how much of a grinder he is, now we don't have any type of social media proof of this, unfortunately. Guy's been working on his game, and he's the hardest worker on the PGA Tour. I've heard that from literally everyone you ask, like who's the guy you see out there the most grinding, it's always Hideki Matsuyama. The guy's always grinding on his putting. Even his full swing, which is beautiful, absolutely immaculate. I wouldn't change a thing. He's always trying to perfect it. And I just think that he's a sleeping giant waiting to come out. Because, I mean, he has, 2-3 wins over the last 9 months on the PGA Tour. He's been an absolute stud. And he's won these birdie fests. He's won at major championships over that stretch. So I would not surprise me, much like a Dustin Johnson, if he went out there and had a solid week. We take a look at outside of the putting. He's gaining a ton of strokes on approach, a ton of strokes off the tee. Again, this does include quite a few rounds of him being quote-unquote hurt, yet still playing some pretty solid golf, gaining around the green and with the putter. So one of the few players in the world that is gaining across all 4 categories. In fact, only 2 players in the world are gaining over 0.22 shots per round in every category. That would be Justin Thomas, who we talked about during the core picks video, and then Hideki Matsuyama. Although Scottie Scheffler, pretty darn close out there at 0.21 per round. But, we got to put cutoff lines there, make stats look favorable for us here sometimes. But either way, I digress. He's $9,900. It's slightly risky because of the back injury, but, we've been fading him because of it for quite some time, but I think this is the time to jump back on board. He's had the time to recover. He looked decent at the Masters, even with the quote-unquote injury that, you could see him wincing from time to time, but by the end of the week, he looked pretty okay to me. That's a sure sign of good things to come. And now lastly, we have Joaquin Niemann at $9,300, and he's really being overlooked. You can see I'm at 16.1% ownership. But that may even be a little bit high. I mean, Will Zalatoris, and same thing with Sam Burns, who I think he's deservingly getting a lot of this attention. It's going to draw a lot of eyes away from Joaquin Niemann. And in terms of a skill set fit, you could argue that he's very similar to the top 2 players. In fact, it might be a better skill set fit just because he's a very solid putter, kind of like a Sam Burns. Very solid off the tee. Joaquin Niemann, one of the longer players on tour, with the long irons, Sam Burns and Joaquin Niemann up there in the top 25 in pretty much every single bucket. And then with the putter, they both gained to the field. So if we take a look at the last 24 measured rounds, you can see he's a gainer across all 4 categories. The around the green play is actually a little bit surprising for Joaquin Niemann. And with Sam Burns, it's everything but off the tee. But we already talked about the Sam Burns off the tee issue. It's been a lot of water balls for Sam Burns that's caused him problems, but there is almost no water in play at this golf course. So in terms of skill set fit, you could argue that they're similar. In fact, you could argue that Joaquin Niemann is more impressive because he's actually been gaining off the tee of late. The putter has also been a little bit less hot than a Sam Burns, but Joaquin Niemann has been known to be a pop putter. Just look at his Genesis Invitational performance. When at the Greenbrier fits that same type of mold. And this guy gets hot with the flat stick. He gains 6 to 7 strokes to the field. And even if he doesn't, he goes out there, just gains 1 to 2, is pretty mediocre right around his baseline. He's still probably going to finish in the top 10, top 15. So I thought he was going to be 20 to 25% owned. You know, a lot of it is, again, just down to the Sam Burns and Will Zalatoris situation, who I'm expecting both of them to also be in my player pool. And as a result, a lot of my lineups are going to be balanced this week, right? It's not going to be taking guys like a Justin Thomas and a Dustin Johnson together. You know, it's going to be taking maybe one or the other, maybe starting with somebody like a Hideki Matsuyama, and taking 2, maybe 3 of the guys here in the 9, top of the 8K range, because that's where really a lot of the best plays on the slate are, in my opinion. Guys that are coming in with good recent form. I think a lot of these guys have a little bit more motivation than the guys towards the top of the board. I mean, just to give you an example, Justin Thomas and Jordan Spieth, they were playing Southern Hills on Monday rather than being at TPC Craig Ranch. So obviously they have their eye on next week. Now, I'm playing both of them in my player pool, but that should just give you an idea of why I think some of these guys in the 9K range and towards the 8K range have a little bit more motivation, or at least a little bit more stake on the line. That's all for the fades and sleeper picks. Go down in the comments and let me know who you're fading this week, and also who you're taking as your sleeper pick. I always like to hear from you guys, so make sure to go ahead and comment that down below. And as per usual, going to have our DFS live stream out tomorrow night. That'll be Wednesday at 7 p.m. Eastern time. A link will be in the description to this video, so you can go ahead and set a reminder there. But as per usual, going to cover the weather, our player pool, projections, any of your live questions, all that sort of fun stuff. So make sure to stop on by with all of those questions. And also make sure you smash the like button to this video, and also subscribe to the channel if you haven't already, so you don't miss any of the content to come. We'll have showdown content for rounds 2 through 4, prize picks videos for all 4 rounds to give you an idea of some of the props that I have my eyes on, and of course, content for all of the golf tournaments to come. So I appreciate the support, guys. Make sure you like and subscribe, and I'll see you guys next time.